I remember sitting in the living room, still dressed in black from my husband's funeral, the scent of lilies lingering in the air like a heavy reminder of loss. I hadn't even had time to take off my shoes when my son, Daniel, cleared his throat. He didn't look at me with the softness I'd expected, not even the pity that sometimes slips into a child's eyes when they see a parent crumble. No, his eyes were cold, calculating. Beside him, his wife, Melissa, crossed her arms, wearing that same smug little smile she'd worn at the graveside, as though this day wasn't about grief, but opportunity. "Mum," Daniel began, his voice clipped. "We need to talk about what comes next. You can't stay here alone. It's too much house, and it's not safe for you anymore. We've decided it's time you move into a nursing home. The house will be ours now." Just like that. No pause, no tenderness. The words landed like stones on my chest. My fingers tightened around the arm of the chair, the one my husband had sat in for years to read the evening paper. I stared at my son, my only son, and felt something fracture deep inside me. The house I had built a life in, the place where I had raised him, was suddenly a prize he felt entitled to claim. Not a home, not a sanctuary, but a possession to be transferred like a piece of furniture. Melissa leaned forward, her tone dripping with false sympathy. "It's really for the best, Dorothy. Think of it as a fresh start. You'll have people around you, activities, meals prepared. And Daniel and I? Well, we'll finally be able to make this house our own." Her hand slid over Daniel's, sealing the betrayal with a gesture that felt rehearsed. I might have wept then, if I hadn't already spent the morning crying at a graveside. But grief has a strange way of sharpening certain parts of you. Instead of breaking, I straightened my back, drawing in a breath that felt steadier than I expected. I smiled, just faintly. "Great," I said, my voice quiet but clear. "Let's drop by the bank first. They're holding the will you forged." The silence that followed was thick, suffocating. Daniel's face drained of color. Melissa's smile faltered. For the first time, they realized I wasn't the fragile widow they imagined. And you? If you're listening to me now, you're probably wondering how I got here. How a 70-year-old woman found herself staring down her son and daughter-in-law after burying her husband. Well, let me tell you. It began with the most humiliating day of my life, and it ended with the most satisfying. 2 days earlier, I stood at the front of St. Mark's Church, staring at the casket draped in white roses. My husband of 45 years lay inside, and I felt as though half of me had been buried with him. The choir hummed softly, the priest spoke of eternal rest, and yet my mind drifted to memories. Our first apartment with peeling wallpaper, the nights we counted pennies at the kitchen table, the way he'd squeeze my hand when the world seemed too heavy. I should have been allowed to grieve in peace. But grief, I learned that day, is rarely private when vultures circle. From my seat in the front row, I overheard Melissa whispering to one of her cousins. "This house is far too much for her. Daniel and I have plans. It'll be a fresh start once things settle." Her tone was hushed but triumphant, like a woman discussing a prize she was about to win. I sat frozen, my hands clasped tightly in my lap. My husband wasn't even in the ground yet, and already they were circling the spoils. I wanted to turn and silence her, but I bit my tongue. Years of being a wife and a mother had taught me patience, but never had it felt so bitter. When the service ended, mourners gathered around, offering condolences. Neighbors hugged me. Old friends pressed tissues into my palm. Daniel stood nearby, his arm around Melissa, his face solemn for the crowd. But not once did he look back at me. Not once did he ask if I was holding up. At the graveside, I lowered a handful of soil onto the casket, whispering a final goodbye. My chest ached with the weight of loneliness. Yet even in that moment, Melissa managed to twist the knife. She leaned close, her voice smooth as silk. Don't worry, Dorothy. We'll take care of everything now. You won't have to lift a finger? I forced a nod, but inside, something shifted. Her words weren't kindness. They were a claim, a warning. That night, I returned to the empty house alone. The silence pressed in from every corner, broken only by the creak of the floorboards and the tick of the clock on the mantel. I sat in my husband's chair, tears streaming freely at last, and thought of the promise he'd made only months earlier. The will is safe at the bank, Dorothy. Don't let anyone rush you into anything. At the time, I'd brushed it aside, never imagining I'd need that reassurance so soon. But as the shadows lengthened across our living room, I realized his warning had not been casual. It had been a shield, one I would soon need to raise. The morning after the funeral, I shuffled into the kitchen, still wrapped in the same black cardigan I'd worn to the graveside. My eyes felt raw from crying, but grief, I learned, doesn't buy you even a day's rest. Daniel was already there, flipping through the newspaper as though nothing had changed, while Melissa stirred cream into her coffee. "Mum," Daniel said without looking up, "we've been talking. This house, it's too much for you. Dad wouldn't want you rattling around here all alone." Melissa chimed in sweetly, too sweetly. "We worry about you, Dorothy. You've been forgetful lately. Yesterday you left the porch light on all day, and last week you misplaced the electric bill. These things happen with age, but they're signs." Her words hit like tiny darts, not enough to wound, but enough to sting. I hadn't forgotten the bill. I'd set it on the counter where she herself had moved it. And as for the porch light, grief had kept me awake that night. I'd left it on deliberately for comfort. But the way she spoke made me second-guess myself. Daniel folded the paper neatly, his tone firm. "Melissa and I just want what's best for you. A smaller place, or maybe assisted living. Somewhere safe." I stared at my son, the boy I'd carried through colic, homework battles, and heartbreaks. The same boy who once said he'd never leave me alone in this world. Yet here he was, parroting his wife's lines like they'd been rehearsed. I pressed my palms against the cool kitchen table, steadying my breath. "I'm not helpless, Daniel. I manage just fine on my own." Melissa tilted her head, that feigned concern etched across her face. "We're not saying you're helpless. We're saying it's time to be realistic. Dad's gone, and this house is too much for a woman your age." Her choice of words lingered. Realistic, your age. Terms that sounded like concern, but carried the weight of dismissal. I could almost hear the subtext. You don't matter anymore. You're in the way. I said nothing then. Silence can be a shield as much as a sword. Instead, I let them think I was pliable, weary, too consumed by loss to argue. But inside, I was cataloguing every word, every insinuation, every attempt to paint me as fragile. Because I had been married to a man who believed in records and receipts. And if Melissa thought she could rewrite my life with whispered lies, she hadn't reckoned with the woman who spent 45 years keeping this family together. 2 days after the funeral, I walked into the dining room to find Daniel and Melissa seated at the table with a man I didn't recognize. He wore a suit that looked too expensive for casual business, and he had a briefcase open in front of him. Papers were stacked neatly in piles, a pen resting on top, as if everything was already decided. Melissa beamed at me, that sugary smile plastered on her face. "Dorothy, this is Mr. Keene. He's here to help us with some paperwork. Just a few formalities to make sure everything is in order." I hesitated in the doorway, my hand still on the frame. Something about the way the man avoided eye contact told me this wasn't formality. It was ambush. Daniel gestured impatiently. "Come sit, Mom. It's simple. Dad made changes to the will before he passed. The house is officially ours now. All we need is your signature here, confirming you'll be moving into Fairview Assisted Living." The words burned like acid. "Fairview?" I asked, forcing calm into my voice. Melissa nodded, as though she were offering me a gift. It's a beautiful place, really. Social activities, full-time care, a library. You'll make friends, have company your own age. We already put down a deposit. Her tone was practiced, patronizing. I glanced at the papers spread before me. The top page bore my husband's name, his signature scrawled across the bottom. But something was wrong. The handwriting was stiff, uneven, nothing like the steady hand I'd known for nearly half a century. I took a seat, folding my hands in my lap. And what does this mean for me, exactly? Mr. Keene cleared his throat, his voice brisk. Mrs. Henderson, your late husband's will leaves the house entirely to your son, Daniel. In exchange, you'll have your living expenses covered at Fairview for the first year. 1 year? I echoed. Daniel shifted uncomfortably. It's generous, Mom. You'll be cared for. Melissa's smile tightened. Think of it as security. We'll handle the burdens of the house now. I stared at the document, then at their eager faces. My son avoided my gaze, letting Melissa carry the show. My husband's body was barely cold in the ground, and here they were, shoving me out of the life I'd built brick by brick. I forced a nod, masking the storm inside me. I'll need time, I said. Something this important shouldn't be rushed. Melissa's smile faltered for just a second before she recovered. Of course. But the sooner, the better. I rose from the table, every step deliberate. Let them think I was bending. What they didn't realize was that while they plotted my removal, I was already planning theirs. That night, I sat alone in the living room, staring at the papers they had laid before me. My husband's name glared up from the page, bold as a signature should be. But the handwriting was all wrong. He'd been meticulous, steady, a man who still prided himself on balancing a checkbook by hand. The scrawl on that document looked rushed, careless. My fingers traced the grooves of the armchair where he used to sit. The weight of his absence pressed on me like a stone, but beneath the grief, something sharper stirred. Suspicion. My husband had always been open about finances. We had talked, just months before, about the will being updated and secured at the bank. He'd told me, almost casually, Dorothy, if anything ever happens, don't let anyone rush you. The originals are in the deposit box. Those words now rang like a bell in my memory. He hadn't said them by accident. He'd known, in his careful way, that foresight was protection. Upstairs, muffled voices leaked from Daniel and Melissa's room. I caught fragments as I moved down the hallway. She'll cave. Give it time. The will is solid. Melissa's laugh floated down, sharp and victorious. My chest tightened, but I kept walking, silent as the house itself. In the quiet of my bedroom, I opened the drawer of my nightstand and pulled out a small leather notebook. Years of habit had made me record details others overlooked, dates of doctor visits, bank transactions, even the day Melissa accidentally misplaced my electric bill. I flipped through the pages, seeing a pattern emerge. One by one, small moments where Melissa had whispered doubts about my memory, subtle corrections, tiny seeds of incompetence planted over months. Forgetful, fragile, vulnerable. Those were the roles she'd been rehearsing for me. I pressed the notebook closed, my hand steady now. She thought grief would make me pliable, that I'd crumble under the weight of loneliness. What she didn't understand was that grief doesn't just hollow you out. It sharpens you too. My husband's warning, my own records, and my instincts all pointed in the same direction. Something was rotten, and it had been carefully arranged. I whispered into the stillness of the room, as though he could still hear me. Don't worry, love. They won't take what we built. Not like this. The next morning, I knew where I had to go. Not to Fairview. Not to their lawyer. To the bank. To the truth. The following morning, I dressed with deliberate care. A navy dress, my pearl brooch, and the coat my husband had always said made me look like a woman who means business. I wasn't going to Fairview or to Melissa's notary. I was going to the bank. The branch manager, Mr. Lawson, had known my husband and me for years. His eyebrows knit together as I handed him the key to our safety deposit box. "Of course, Mrs. Henderson," he said gently, though I caught the flicker of curiosity in his eyes. It wasn't every day that a grieving widow showed up the morning after a funeral. He led me into the small private room and placed the box on the table. My hands trembled as I opened it, but not from weakness, from anticipation. Inside lay the neat stack of envelopes my husband had insisted on keeping here: insurance papers, savings bonds, and at the very bottom, the will, the real will. I slid it out carefully, unfolding the crisp pages. The handwriting was steady, the signatures clear. This was my husband's hand, no doubt about it. And the contents. As he had told me many times, the house remained in both of our names, with instructions that it would transfer fully to me upon his death. Only after my passing would Daniel inherit, provided I had no debts against the estate. I closed my eyes for a moment, relief flooding me. My husband had protected me, even beyond the grave. "Everything in order?" Mr. Lawson asked. "More than in order," I said, sliding the papers back into their folder. "But I'd like copies made. Certified, if possible." He nodded, excused himself, and returned with a notary from the bank. Within 20 minutes, I had official duplicates tucked neatly into my handbag. Before leaving, I asked, almost casually, "Mr. Lawson, if someone were to present another version of this will, one signed differently, what would that mean legally?" His expression turned grave. "It would be forgery, Mrs. Henderson. A very serious crime." I smiled faintly, though inside anger simmered. That's what I thought. As I stepped back into the cool morning air, the weight of doubt I'd carried since the funeral shifted into something else entirely: certainty. Daniel and Melissa thought they could gaslight me into surrendering everything I'd built. They didn't realize I now held the truth, and the law, in my hands. And soon, they'd learn what it felt like to underestimate the wrong woman. The next morning, I decided to play along. I rose early and cooked breakfast: pancakes, bacon, fresh coffee, the kind of spread I hadn't made in weeks. Grief had stolen my appetite, but today I had purpose. If Melissa and Daniel thought I was a frail widow, I would let them underestimate me just a little longer. Melissa came into the kitchen first, her silk robe cinched tightly around her waist. She paused, surprised. "Well, this is unusual," she said, sliding into a chair. "What's the occasion?" "Just felt like cooking," I replied, setting the plate before her. "We used to do this often, remember, Daniel?" My son appeared moments later, hair still damp from his shower. He muttered a greeting, sat down, and reached for the syrup. The silence stretched, broken only by the clink of forks on plates. I sipped my coffee, studying them both. Finally, I asked, casually as I could, "Tell me again, when did your father supposedly change his will?" Daniel froze mid-bite. Melissa's eyes flicked toward him before she spoke. "Earlier this year, of course. He wanted to make sure everything was settled quickly." "Strange," I said softly, buttering my toast, "because he told me, not 3 months ago, that the will was safe at the bank. He was always so meticulous about those things." Melissa's smile tightened, her fork clinking a little too hard against her plate. "Well, people change their minds. Maybe he didn't want to worry you. Maybe." I leaned back, folding my hands. "And when exactly did he discuss Fairview Nursing Home with you two? Because he never mentioned it to me." Daniel shifted uncomfortably. "Mom, you know Dad worried about you. He just wanted to make sure you'd be looked after." I tilted my head, studying him. "Funny, then, that he never even toured the place with me. Don't you think that's odd, Daniel?" His eyes dropped to his plate. Melissa jumped in, her tone sharper now. You're twisting things, Dorothy. The important point is that he made provisions. That's all. I smiled faintly, sipping my coffee. Perhaps, or perhaps someone else has been making provisions that don't belong to them. Melissa stiffened, her fork hovering in the air. Daniel rubbed his temple. For the first time, cracks appeared in their polished confidence. They were so sure I'd fold under pressure. They hadn't realized I was testing them, and they'd just failed. By the third day, the politeness was gone. Melissa no longer tried to sweeten her words with honey, and Daniel's patience had worn thin. They cornered me in the living room after dinner, papers in hand once again, their faces tight with determination. "Mum," Daniel said, his voice louder than usual. "Enough is enough. This house is too big for you. Dad wanted us to have it, and you're making this harder than it needs to be. Just sign the papers." Melissa stood at his side, arms crossed, chin lifted in triumph. "It's not complicated, Dorothy. The sooner you accept reality, the sooner we can move forward. Fairview has a room ready for you. You'll be safe, cared for, surrounded by people your own age. Isn't that better than rattling around here, waiting for something to happen?" Her words sliced at me, each one meant to chip away at my confidence. But I only looked at them, really looked. My son, red-faced and fidgeting, his eyes darting anywhere but mine. My daughter-in-law, smug and unyielding, certain her plan had already succeeded. I set my teacup down carefully, the porcelain clinking against the saucer. My voice was calm, steady, a sharp contrast to their rising tempers. "And if I don't sign?" Daniel's jaw clenched. "Then we'll go to court. We'll prove you can't handle things on your own. We've talked to people, Mum. You've been forgetful. You've been confused." Melissa leaned forward, her eyes glittering. "Do you really want to drag this out, Dorothy? Everyone knows what's best for you. Why not just do the right thing?" I let the silence stretch, watching them squirm in it. Then, slowly, I smiled. Not the smile of a beaten-down widow, but the kind of smile my husband once called my warning smile. "All right," I said softly. "Let's do it. Let's go right now." "But not to Fairview." Melissa blinked, thrown off. "What are you talking about?" "To the bank," I replied. "They're holding the will you forged. I think it'll be very educational to hear what they have to say." The colour drained from Daniel's face, his bravado faltering. Melissa's lips parted, but no words came out. The silence that followed was more damning than any confession. For the first time since this nightmare began, I wasn't the one on trial. They were. The next morning, I insisted we drive to the bank together. Melissa argued at first, claiming she had other errands and that the matter could wait. But I didn't budge. Daniel, caught between her glare and my quiet resolve, finally grabbed the car keys with a muttered, "Fine. Let's get this over with at the bank, mister." Lawson, the manager, welcomed us into a private room. He looked puzzled to see me flanked by my son and daughter-in-law, papers clutched in Melissa's hand like a sword she was ready to swing. "Mrs. Henderson," he said gently, "how can I help today?" I opened my handbag and laid down the certified copies he had prepared for me the day before. "I'd like you to confirm, for my son and his wife, which of these documents is the valid will." Melissa's smile faltered. "We already have the will," she said quickly, shoving their forged version across the table. "This is the one her husband signed." Mr. Lawson adjusted his glasses, scanning it carefully. His brows furrowed. "This signature is inconsistent, and the formatting is not in line with our standard documents. Where did you obtain this?" Melissa's cheeks flushed. It was given to us by a lawyer. Dad wanted us to handle things." But Lawson cut her off, his tone clipped now. "Mrs. Henderson's husband kept his original will secured here. I notarized it myself. That document you've brought is not only invalid, it's fraudulent. Daniel paled, shifting uncomfortably in his chair. Wait. Fraudulent? Yes, Lawson replied firmly. Forgery is a serious offence. If this was presented as genuine, the consequences could be severe. Melissa sputtered, trying to salvage her composure. You don't understand. She's confused. She doesn't know what she's saying. I leaned forward, my voice like steel. Confused? Mr. Lawson, would you kindly read the clause my husband included about the house? He nodded, scanning the pages. Yes, here it is. The property remains in joint ownership with Mrs. Henderson. Upon his passing, it transfers fully to her. No exceptions. Silence fell, heavy and damning. Daniel's shoulders slumped, the fight draining out of him. Melissa, however, gripped the forged will so tightly her knuckles whitened. I sat back, calm at last. So, you see, mister? Lawson, it wasn't me who was confused. It was them who thought they could outsmart both me and the law. Melissa finally spoke, her voice trembling with fury. You'll regret this, Dorothy. But for the first time, I saw fear in her eyes, the fear of someone who realized the game was slipping from her grasp. By the time we left the bank, Melissa's bravado had cracked into silence. She sat rigid in the back seat, clutching that forged will like a shield already splintering. Daniel drove with his jaw clenched, eyes fixed on the road, avoiding both of our gazes. I sat calmly in the passenger seat, the real documents safe in my handbag, the weight of truth steadying me. That afternoon, I placed a call to my lawyer, Mr. Grant. He had been a family friend for years, someone my husband trusted implicitly. I explained everything, the funeral, the ambush at the table, the forged papers. There was a long pause on the line, then his voice, firm and clipped. Dorothy, that's elder fraud. And forgery on top of it. We'll act immediately, by evening. A sheriff's deputy stood at my front door with Mr. Grant beside him. Daniel opened the door, his face draining as the deputy introduced himself. We've received reports of attempted financial exploitation and forgery, the officer said, his tone all business. We'll need to see the documents in question. Melissa stormed into the hallway, her voice high and shrill. This is ridiculous. She's confused. She doesn't know what she's saying. Daniel, tell them. But Daniel said nothing. He stared at the floor, his silence louder than any defense. Mr. Grant laid the forged will on the table beside the original. As you can see, he told the deputy, these signatures don't match. Mrs. Henderson had her husband's will notarized and secured at the bank. This other document was presented to her under pressure, with the intent to have her sign away her property. The deputy flipped through the pages, then looked squarely at Melissa. Ma'am, do you understand the severity of presenting falsified legal documents? For once, she had no clever reply. Her lips pressed into a thin line, her hands trembling. I sat quietly in my chair, watching the scene unfold, not with triumph, but with a strange kind of sorrow. This was my family unraveling before my eyes. My son shrinking in shame, my daughter-in-law revealed as the predator I'd long suspected. The deputy gathered the forged papers into an evidence envelope. This will be turned over to the district attorney's office. Further action will be taken. Melissa finally snapped, pointing at me with shaking hands. This is all her fault. She's just a bitter old woman who can't let go. But her words sounded hollow now. The law had spoken, and the walls around their scheme were collapsing. That night, after the deputy left and Melissa had stormed upstairs in a fury, Daniel lingered in the hallway. He looked smaller somehow, shoulders hunched, eyes shadowed with something between shame and despair. For the first time in days, he wasn't carrying himself like a man standing behind his wife's shield. He looked like my boy again, lost, conflicted, afraid. Mum, he said quietly, stepping into the living room. Can we talk? I folded the blanket across my lap, nodding toward the armchair opposite me. He sat down heavily, burying his face in his hands before lifting it again, his voice breaking. I don't know how it got this far. Melissa, she pushed for everything, said it was for the best, said Dad wanted us to move forward. I didn't know she was forging anything. I studied him, my heart twisting. He was still my son, still the boy I had raised, but also the man who had stood silently while his wife tried to strip me of everything. Daniel, I said softly, whether you signed the papers yourself or stood by and let her, you were part of it. He winced. I know. God, I know. I thought maybe she was right, that you'd be safer in a home, that we could handle things better. I told myself it was love, that I was protecting you, but maybe it was just easier to let her take control. His words fell heavy in the room. I thought of the nights I had stayed awake with him as a child, the sacrifices I'd made to pay for his education, the pride I felt watching him graduate. And now, here he was, confessing that when it mattered most, he'd chosen comfort over courage. Tears welled in his eyes. I betrayed you, Mum. I let her paint you as weak, and I didn't stop her. I don't know if you'll ever forgive me. I let the silence linger, my chest aching. Forgiveness, I said at last, doesn't erase the harm done, but it gives us both a chance to choose differently next time. The question is whether you'll be the kind of man your father raised you to be, or whether you'll keep hiding behind excuses. He swallowed hard, his voice trembling. I want to be better. I'll make this right. I searched his face, looking for truth. For once, I saw it there. Broken, but real. The weeks that followed were a blur of lawyers, paperwork, and whispered gossip among neighbors who had once admired Daniel and Melissa's polished smiles. Melissa tried to fight, of course, claiming misunderstandings, spinning lies about me being unstable. But the forged will in the deputy's hands spoke louder than any excuse she could manufacture. By the time the district attorney's office finished reviewing the evidence, Melissa's name was stamped on formal charges: forgery and attempted elder exploitation. Daniel stayed, hovering between shame and guilt, trying to patch up what Melissa had torn apart. He apologized again and again, sometimes in halting words, sometimes in small gestures, repairing the broken fence his father had always meant to fix, or quietly setting the table for two when I was too tired to cook. He was learning, slowly, that love wasn't about control or silence. It was about standing up, even when it meant standing alone. One afternoon, I stood in the garden my husband and I had planted decades earlier, the sun dipping low across the yard. The house loomed behind me, not just wood and brick, but memory. Every room told a story. The hallway lined with Daniel's school pictures, the kitchen where I had whispered my suspicions into the night, the living room where I had faced down betrayal. They had tried to strip this place from me, but they had failed. A neighbor called over the fence, "Dorothy, we're all proud of you. Not everyone has the strength to fight back." I smiled, humbled, but the truth was simpler. I hadn't fought for pride. I'd fought for survival, for dignity, for the right to live my final years on my own terms. Melissa's absence left the house quieter, yes, but also freer. Daniel began visiting in the evenings, sometimes with groceries, sometimes just to sit in silence with me. There were still fractures between us, scars from choices he had made, but there was also the faint outline of something worth rebuilding. That night, as I sat in my husband's chair with the will safely tucked in my desk drawer, I whispered to the empty room, "We did it, love. They won't take this from us." Because in the end, the house was never just about property. It was about legacy, about a lifetime of love, sacrifice, and resilience that could not be forged away with a signature. And if anyone doubted it, well, the proof was standing right here. A 70-year-old woman who refused to be erased.